Hey there, sports history fans. Ross here of the Pigskin Tales. Here to tell you all about a new way to play fantasy football this upcoming season. Tailgate Fantasy Sports is the game you've been waiting for. It's a new type of fantasy football that's totally free and easy to play. Just sign up with your email, pick your favorite NFL team, and set a 3-man lineup using only players from your team. Rotate 2 players each week and have power-ups to boost your players' scores. Best part? 1 random power-up drops every week. Now, it won't replace your existing leagues. In fact, it might be the way to get some of your favorite players on your team because we all know how hard it is to get your hometown team's players in your home league. That is, if you truly follow some semblance of ADP. I mean, come on, you really think I'm getting Justin Jefferson at market value in my home league? I highly doubt it. You can get all the rules at tailgatefantasysports.com, but the real action happens at tailgatefantasy.io. Tailgate Fantasy Sports, where true fans rule the game. Join now and help us all put the word fan back into fantasy football.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. In this episode, we have a former car salesman who went from fast talking deals to fast ranking fantasy football players. Now, he's full-time in the industry, primarily with RotoWire and his company, Faceoff Sports Network. But if you see him online, you might recognize him as the real NFL guru. Welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where each episode is a journey back in time to explore the unique experiences of some of the coolest and most influential people in the fantasy football industry. I'm your host, Arnie Chapman, also known as the Football History Dude. Now, I love fantasy football, and I want you to come along with me to explore the yesteryear of the armchair gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour.
Great Scott!
This time to stop with the DeLorean. The date is December 30th, 2012. We're here to watch Adrian Peterson tote the rock 34 times for 199 yards and a touchdown, finishing the year with 2,097 yards. The last running back to cross that, the pinnacle 2,000-yard rushing mark. All Day ended up with 347 PPR points, according to Fantasy Football Reference that year, with Doug Martin, yes, Muscle Hamster Reference himself, at number 2 with 312 points. Well, we're also here in 2012 because if you look at this week's guest's LinkedIn profile, it's the last year he worked at a car dealership, a place where he realized he might be able to pursue this whole football or fantasy football career. Not to mention he's also built like the Muscle Hamster. Our guest is known online as the real NFL guru. He is Anthony Cervino of RotoWire and Fantasy Faceoff. And we'll get into his fantasy football origin story in a bit, but first, if you enjoy the show, I gotta ask that you please tell at least one friend about it. You could tell them about fantasy football origin stories on their podcast app of choice, or you could also send them over to fantasyfootballoriginstories.com for even more information. Now, I've said it before, but I gotta say it again. It's the fantasy football podcast you don't mind sharing, because we're not talking rankings, we're going back in time to learn about how the people that run this industry got their start. And speaking of heading back in time, now's a good time as any to hop on that DeLorean, tap the little flux capacitor, and get that baby up to 88 miles per hour to learn more about the fantasy football origin story of Mr. Anthony Cervino. My original show was actually the Football History Dude, so I could have had you on that one as well, but then I jumped into fantasy football. I've always wanted to do that. I wanted to be the fantasy football dude, air quotes or whatever, but then there's about 1 million of them out there, so I said, let's start a football history show, and this one is more revolving around like your backstory. I'm less interested right now about like your takes and all that stuff. I want to just kind of go back and time and go from like when you're a sleazy car salesman to now being on fantasy football and that type of thing. So before I get started, I always like to figure out, so where do your NFL loyalties lie if you even do have a team you follow?
Cowboys.
Oh man, we got to check out and log out. So, okay, first I got to understand why, and then I'll follow it up from there.
Why am I a Cowboys fan?
Yeah. Is this like a locale thing, or is this like, hey, you know, I was growing up in the 90s and I watched the Trio or anything like that?
Well, I am 38, so I did grow up in that triplets era, but my parents on one side were Giants and Jets fans. I'm from New Jersey. And then my dad is actually from like close, like Western New Jersey, which is borders Philly. So he was an Eagles season ticket holder. So I kind of was in the middle, and he once took me when I was young to a Eagles Cowboys game. And it's like when you were a kid and you see the star on the side of the helmet and the whole stadium hating it. And I'm like, oh, I love this. And that's kind of how it started.
I see. So yeah, because it wasn't a home thing, it was like I'm actually rooting against for another reason. Actually, I got to throw this up there in the thing then. So my Barry Sanders coaster is never too far from me. So as a Lions fan, you know, and Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders rivalries, always seeing each other's teams on Thanksgiving and stuff. I actually lived in Dallas for about 5 years, and my grandpa disowned me, you know, when he thought I might become a Cowboys fan, but it never turned out that way. But so let's get into the fantasy football portion of the show. I got a first. What's your first memory of fantasy football? Just like playing it, or even just being introduced to it?
I was introduced to fantasy at a young age. Again, more, you know, my family played in leagues. And I didn't know what it was, but it was like my stepdad played with my uncle in this league with their friends. And I was always into sports, but I liked, like, even to this day, when I play, like, video games, like, the video game trajectory is, like, everybody creates these fantasy teams and plays with it. Well, I like playing with the exact rosters, and I was always like this. So I would get, like, the Lindy's NFL magazine as a, 10-year-old kid, and then get white out and, watch ESPN, and I would white out the player who gets cut and then write in the new player. So I always kept up with rosters, and they would bring me to these fantasy drafts. And as I got, I would say like maybe 12 years old, I started helping my stepdad out with his team. And then we started partnering. And when I say like, there was no internet. It was, you went to the draft, and the draft order was done by playing cards. So if you got the ace, you had the first pick in that round, but there was no snake. The snake concept wasn't there. So if you drew the ace every round, you were picking number one every round. So like that was my introduction to fantasy football. And I remember the first time I actually partnered, wasn't just going, but actually part of the team. We had a run of picking like Terrell Davis when he blew out his knee. Then the next year was Jamal Anderson. So I literally just kept dealing with injuries. And the first stack we ever drafted, my stepdad is a Jets fan, was a Corbett Testaverde. So I've been around fantasy for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking touchdown Terrell Davis and going back to Jamal Anderson, the Dirty Bird and everything. I mean, that was a minute ago. So I'm the same age as you, but I didn't get into it as such an early age, of course, watching football.
It was like an accident, a happy accident.
I mean, it worked out long term. I mean, you're on the pinnacle of fantasy football origin stories. But what about, so you said drew a card for the round, then every round. You mean like you drew it the first and like your typical draft, right? It wasn't every round you drew a new card, right?
It was every round. Was every round and it was unfair. Like if you had bad luck, you could have been picking 12 every round or 10. I think it was the leagues were 10 back then for a while.
So like one round you might, I got pick 2, and then next round I got pick 8, and then it's like it could flip flop That's interesting. I've never heard of it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they started introducing the actual snake draft after a few years. But yeah, it was literally playing cards. Ace was the first pick, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Huh. I mean, I've always had snake drafts since I've been playing fantasy football. As far as I can remember, back then maybe it was before snake got involved, but never crazy. Like you don't know which round you're gonna or which pick you're gonna be in each round. That's very unique. I mean, You mentioned Dirty Bird, you mentioned the Jamal Anderson, and you mentioned some other guys, but like, who were some of your favorite players? I mean, you've been around forever, like that were always constantly on your team, I guess, growing up.
When I started managing my own teams, I would say the one I always loved Derek Mason. He was somebody I always liked to draft. He was pretty solid, consistent, whether it was Baltimore. I think he was even back with the Houston Oilers and then obviously the Titans with Steve McNair. But I always loved like Derek Mason, and I feel like I won most of my championship with guys like Reggie Wayne on my team.
Yeah, I remember. So Derek Mason, if I remember, he was more like the PPR gold type. He was never the monster touchdown guy, was he?
No, but he was always like, if you were in a PPR format, Derek Mason was money.
Yeah, I remember even later on his career, as I would always grab him, it was more of like like you said, there was a consistent guy I could always get real late and that kind of thing. What about, hey, I didn't give you this yet. Here's the DeLorean. So you're going to go back. You can relate because you were born the same year this one came out then if you're 38. But what about, I don't know, I'll give you one mulligan for some kind of draft that you made or a trade or some stupid thing. You can go back and you can change it. What would it be?
The year, I think it was it could have been his final year, where he was traded to two different teams. He started out in New England, then they traded him to Minnesota, and then they traded him to Tennessee. That Moss pick. It was like my first real year of like bad fantasy football, where like my team might have won 2 games. It was just bad. And Breeze was my quote. It was just a bad year with Breeze and Moss.
Oh, and this is like Breeze post all of the mega, every year being perennial top 3 or whatever.
I don't know if I just blame it because, again, like I had my guys, and back then my guys were like Reggie Wayne and Aaron Rodgers. So the year I literally draft Drew Brees and Randy Moss, my team goes to crap.
I see what you're saying.
So I just blame Drew Brees for that, just for that bad year. I'm like, I'm never drafting this guy again.
Yeah, it had to have been Drew Brees' fault for sure. I mean, that's the only plausible explanation. What about just in general? I mean, like, I guess you said I picked Wayne was my guy all the time. Like, what's been your strategy throughout time? Maybe not strategy. Like, what's your style? Maybe that's more what I should ask.
My style, especially now, I always like best player available and taking value, taking what falls to me, because the current form of the fantasy football industry, year after year, there's zero running back, zero wide receiver, hero running back, robust running back. Like when I just played when fantasy football was much more simpler times, where you just draft the best team. And as basic as that sounds, that's what works for me. Because all drafts are different, right? Like you go in and you want to draft 0 wide receiver, but let's say good wide receivers are falling. You're really going to pass up on these players just to stick to your strategy and kind of put yourself in a deficit before the season already starts. So I always like adjusting to the draft on the fly.
Yeah, I think that's something that in the past I used to be so, and I think I talked about this dang near every episode, but like I would be so hardcore running back heavy at the beginning, and I was against being willing to, you're shaking your head because that might have been you too. But, I think that's something I suggest, or I've shifted more recently. It's again, best player available. I like that strategy because, again, going back to another thing I used to always fail at, and maybe still do sometimes, is I'd hold on to my guys I drafted because I spent all summer, you know what I'm talking about, all summer drafting. Planting a flag, and then now it's like week 3, and so I probably should get rid of them already, and I would hold on too long.
It's not so much about, for me, the flag plant players. It's more about thinking, okay, it's going to be the next week, it's going to be the next game, the opportunity is going to be there, and it's more or less with my bench guys. Because when I'm drafting bench guys, I'm trying to think a few steps ahead, and okay, well, there's eventually going to be an injury here, or if something's going to eventually happen, I don't want to get rid of this player who's going to be a locked and loaded RB1 if the starting running back goes down, and then give it to somebody else.
Yep, same thing. But then on the flip side, it's like, because you always hold on to that point where, yeah, I know I drafted that guy at whatever the late round, and then he ends up blowing up the week after you drop him, and then you kind of like stick to that one. But Hey, that's kind of how it is, especially when you've been playing for so long. It's amazing how you've been able to. So, okay, what's the biggest, I don't want to say shift, but how have you seen the approach to maybe playing fantasy with your friends as it's become more mainstream?
I actually, at this point, feel like, because people think you're in the industry, especially, that you're going to go clean up a home league draft. I feel like I'm at a disadvantage in a home league draft because when you're drafting against other experts or even people like on fantasy Twitter who are immersed in fantasy football year round and into draft strategies, and we all kind of have the same style or ADP, then you go to a home league draft where these people are only playing, and they come here in August and they're going to consume content in August and they're going to leave when their team gets eliminated for the playoffs. They're not drafting the same way. So like, you'll be in a home league draft and, a couple of years ago when Gronk is still being taken in the second round. Yeah. Or like, where you'll still get a quarterback. Last year in my home league, somebody took Burrow in the first round. You're not that puts me at a disadvantage because how the hell do I react?
Yeah, no, I fully understand that because the same thing, even though I'm not like an industry expert by any means, it's you got certain leagues with certain players, it's like totally wild cards. Throw the ADP out the window, and then of course you get your homers and stuff, and then I kick myself like, man, if I would have just waited, I could have got the same guy here. I can't believe he's here at this point, and then you start double guessing things and such.
Yeah. Or you're like, you're doing 20 drafts and you're in your home league draft, and all of a sudden, like, okay, this player falls to me every single draft, and then he's overdrafted. So it's like, and then it makes me want to overdraft players that I want, and so that's the change is just seeing the two different type of fantasy football players where you have like the hardcore people, and then your home league friends. So they're just two different draft styles, and you kind of have to try to prepare for the unexpected in a home league draft.
I wonder how much of even a bigger gap that was, say, 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago, before like fantasy football podcasts and being able to have the coverage, like everyone blew up. Now the layman person can have a ranking that's similar to the other one. I wonder what it was like back then, where like how much different it was with people going with whatever homer picks and such.
I mean, back in those, before the internet, it was you had magazines, right? You had like the Die Hard magazine. That you had a couple of fantasy magazines, and everybody went to the draft with that, and their highlighters and like a notepad. So like there wasn't that much variance where like here, like, you have 100 analysts, you can go get their rankings, or you can get a consensus from Fantasy Pros or ESPN, or even our at Faceoff. We have our own rankings and ADP consensus with our staff. It's not like that back then. Like you had like 3 or 4 magazines you were going off of.
Yeah, I always tell this story too about the one year we went to and this is before really the internet and stuff. We went to a draft, and one of my buddies is, oh no, I didn't bring a cheat sheet with me, so I pulled out the previous year's book and magazine and gave it to him. He started using it. Yeah, I know it wasn't. But hey, fantasy football is thicker than blood.
You got to get an edge. You got to get an edge.
And I don't remember like the year, and I'm sure I tell the story different every time, but I do know there was one player he picked that was out for the year. So I'd be lying to you if I knew which one it was, but this is at least 10 years ago. So, but anyway, yeah, totally changed, different. We can draft now on our phones and such. But I mean, so you've seen, again, through various playing in the industry, blah, blah, blah. You've seen it a lot. So let's go back in that DeLorean again. The real reason why I got you here. Let's go back in time to the time when you're like, okay, I think, I really enjoy this thing, but let's start trying to cover fantasy football, and maybe like a timeline up until being on Fantasy Football Origin Stories.
I spent my 20s in the car business, sales, in that grind. And I was good at it. I liked it, but I wasn't passionate about it. I really wanted to be a cop. But, when you're in your young 20s and you get that taste of sales and that money, then you're like, oh, I'm going to stick to this because I'm good at it. But I was so immersed into fantasy football where all my downtime in between customers at the dealership, I'd be on the internet doing fantasy stuff where I would just be talking football. I mean, I remember when ESPN, I used to like all different sports, and then ESPN, that was it. And then the NFL Network was launched, and that was it. I was just NFL Network football. It just took my life over. And people saw that and they saw like, well, he knows more than most of us just talking general football. And people that I worked with at the dealership, like, hey, you should try to pursue this. And it's like, how do you pursue it? And I never think I'm that good anyway. Like I always downplay myself to this day. And one day I got into a life-changing car accident. I was T-boned. I had to get neck surgery. And, that put me through a lot where, that's, the whole mental health podathon that we do. And I suffered through a painkiller addiction, bad. And once I came out of that, a couple of stints in rehab to try to get myself completely off, I was at a crossroads in life. Like, do I go back into the car business or do I try to pursue my dream, which was covering the NFL in some way? It wasn't really fantasy that I wanted to do. I like, talk radio. I liked NFL radio. And before Sirius XM merger, you had Sirius NFL radio, and it's still around, Sirius XM, but it was just the NFL channel. This was before Sirius XM fantasy. I wanted to do that. So I saw the quickest foot in the door in covering fantasy football. Okay, I can get my foot in the door this way and hopefully make my way into sports talk radio. So that was my direction, kind of. So I got my start at Fantasy Pros on their news desk, and eventually I ended up at Gridiron Experts and spent a lot of time, like years, working up the ranks there, becoming their head guy. And that's where, Mike Hoff and I created the Faceoff podcast through Gridiron Experts, and eventually we kind of outgrew Gridiron Experts. And the Faceoff became its own entity. And a couple of years ago, I would say about 3 years ago, we decided like we have to go in a new direction. Like we can't just be a floating podcast. Like we need a website. And then I partnered with my partner now, Aaron, and we built a website to go along with this podcast. And the website right now is doing really, really well, like exceeding expectations for only being 2.5 years old. So that's kind of how I got here. And I'm also full-time in the industry. That on kind of like on the side of fantasy, I started getting into sports betting because the biggest advice I give anybody now, if you want to be full-time in the fantasy, NFL, sports betting is your quickest road because that is growing rapidly. It's still only a few years old. Still half the states are not legal. And then on top of sports betting, online casinos, that's gold because, you don't have to like sports to go to a casino or go to an online casino. Like my grandmother, if she was still alive, she would be on the slot machines and you could play online slots. So like literally online casinos cater to everybody. So the whole affiliate marketing game. If anybody who wants to make a living and make decent money, start freelance copywriting for sports betting and sports betting affiliates. Because that led me to a full-time job at the gambling group RotoWire. I'm now an SEO editor. But don't just limit yourself to one thing. Go another direction. You have to be open. Not everybody's going to be Colin Cowherd. Not everybody's going to be Adam Rank. But you can make a very good living in this industry on the back end.
Some good, actually, you answered the final question that we always have here as far as like your recommendations and such to everybody. You kind of alluded to FF Faceoff and then the website. Let's give the listener of the show what that website is. So if they wanted to go check it out.
It's www.fffaceoff.com.
And then when they go there, like what's the expectations or what's it different? I don't know. What's your unique selling proposition, whatever you want to call it for FF Faceoff?
I mean, not only do you get the quality of the writing and the content, but like everybody, it seems like in one form or another, they have a Patreon, they have a paywall. Our content's free. There's no paywalls. There's no, okay, well, you got to sign up and pay $5 for this episode or this article. Everything's free, from podcasts, videos, articles at our website. Like, we don't believe in the paywall. So that is one advantage over everybody else, or a lot of other sites. We have other ways to generate revenue.
What's the difference between the Faceoff Sports Network and everything? That's just kind of the combination of the whole deal, and that's FF Faceoff kind of started it from there.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The FF Faceoff podcast started it all. And then when I partnered with Aaron on the website end, he's like, let's not limit ourselves to fantasy football and football. Like, we call it Faceoff Sports Network. You'll find some sports betting picks, but some MLB fantasy content. Sometimes we have soccer people on there, because like that's the next market. If you're a forward thinker, soccer. If I can turn on, Xfinity cable. That's what I have in New Jersey. And find, like, on the USA Network and NBC, English Premier League soccer. I can find La Liga. I can find international soccer every day. And if that's on our TVs now, with the popularity of the sport around the world, it's only natural that with sports betting, it's going to pop in this country. We see Lionel Messi signing with Inter Miami. I'm not a big American soccer guy. Like, the product's not great, but all of a sudden I'm watching MLS because of Messi. So just because of Messi and all the guys he's bringing over, this product's going to pop. So, like, start covering soccer. Try to get outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good recommendation too for anybody that's interested in, like you said, trying new things and breaking into an industry of some sort. Earlier, so I got to go back to the part where you said, so the Mental Health Podathan, and it looked like it was partnered with Hayden Hurst. You kind of alluded to that. If someone wanted to, or when does that go live, and how, if someone wants to contribute, how would they do so?
Well, the Mental Health Podathan, we just had our 4th season partnered with Hayden Hurst and the Hayden Hurst Foundation. It's usually right around training camp or before training camp, because we like having Hayden on, and he's gracious to come on every year. So it has to be before he goes to camp. So it's usually at some point in July. And this year we raised $4,650, and I believe we're just around 18,000 in the 4 years. So our goal next year, going into year 5, is to have the biggest year ever and try to get to 25,000 in 5 years.
Okay, so next year, again, around July, mid-July is when the listener of the show should be tuning in for something like that then.
Yeah, and again, fffaceoff.com, we have a mental health section in the menu that you can get information on the Podathon, the GoFundMe link, and we even we're starting to create mental health articles and podcasts as well. So we don't want to just make it a one-time thing. We want to start becoming an authority on mental health in the sports space, because, like I alluded to it earlier, with my past and addiction and mental health, like that goes hand in hand. So that's something big in my life. Like, that's something I live. That is something my wife lived. I have family members, friends who have mental health issues, and it's something that needs to, that stigma, like, that's not just a line, like, that stigma needs to be broken.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good, I mean, of course you lived it, and like you said, so it's something that you can speak from empathy too, but it's something that, again, we on the network would gladly help promote that for you. I don't know where I want to go with the next question there. I hate to follow it up on that one, but I was going to ask you, like, from your time at the, as an auto salesman, and maybe some of the skills that you learned there that kind of translated into your experience on the mic, or, working with people and that kind of thing. Like, what do you think you gained the most from it?
Selling cars, man, it's such a weird business, because you literally go into it, like 9 out of 10 customers, they think you're a jerk, right? Like, that nobody likes going to deal with a car salesman. So it's very difficult to, like, you have to know how to try to get a rapport. And some customers just don't want to be bothered trying to be friendly, get a rapport. They just have this opinion about being in a car dealership. So I guess is learning how to deal with negativity from people. And in this industry, you deal with some trolls, you deal with negativity. So I guess it makes me very thick-skinned. Made me very, very thick-skinned, where people can say what they want to me. I don't care. Like, I'm talking about football. I'm talking about fantasy football. I don't care if you don't like my takes. Like, go listen to somebody else. Like, it's not what you say to me isn't going to go make me lose sleep. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it's the reality of it. Like, we're here to have fun, make some money. Like, everybody's not going to like my takes. And I think, we see it on, like people need to try to just like let some stuff go instead of trying to get into Twitter wars, because nobody's going to win them. It's a headache.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just want to troll the troll. I have a friend, very close friend. I call him a professional troll. He likes trolling people. Like, some people like it. So you kind of just let it go. It's not that big of a deal. Don't lose sleep over it. And in actuality, like, if you look at the national media hosts like Colin Cowherd, Stephen A. Smith, like the most hated guys, they're getting paid millions of dollars. And I would say 60% of their listeners do not like them. So you kind of need that negativity. Almost think of like being an on-air person or like being a content creator. Like, think about it as almost like it's almost like being in like pro wrestling, where you need that balance of good and bad to put yourself over.
So there you go. You're the heel.
I'm not trying to be a heel. No, I'm not a heel. I don't think I'm a heel. But I think it's also like, I also don't like, I don't hit the block button if somebody don't like me.
Right.
Like,
right.
I don't, that's not being a heel. It's just like, hey, you're listening to me. You're consuming my content, whether you like it or not. So I think, if that's more advice I would give to people, like, welcome that negativity a little bit, because they're consuming your content still, and they might just be consuming so they can troll you. But that's also like, if you're getting monetized, that's revenue.
Right. Well, so maybe not the heel, but then you also said what you're into and what you be following. I'd be remiss if we didn't get into it. You mentioned earlier about the being a league historian, whatever you want to call it, but like, so are you just a fan of all of NFL history, or is there like a particular era that you followed, or what?
I guess it goes back to how, I guess my childhood, where it's like, I wasn't into superheroes. Like, I watched Batman and stuff, but like my superheroes were like NFL players and like WWF. Like, Hulk Hogan was my superhero. Like, he was real. Like, I knew I could go to the gym one day and grow and get big like Hulk Hogan. So like, as a kid, I was very attracted to that. And also as a kid, it's like, you remember NFL films and Steve Sable that would have football follies. And in those football follies, if you go back and watch some of the old content, that would put cartoon noises or even like cartoon clips, and that would draw kids into it. So like, anytime NFL films was on, I would watch it. And then like, you would also, like, growing up, like, you're kind of learning about the history of the NFL. So that drew me in. And then obviously the birth of the NFL Network, and being able to see all of the NFL films in one place, and the top 10s and the replays of the Super Bowl. And yeah, I consumed it all. Like, America's Game is great. When they talk about all the different Super Bowls and all the player profiles and biographies and learning about the history of the game, like, it's amazing to me. Because we would not have football, the product, the billion-dollar industry that it is today, the billion-dollar fantasy football industry, that would not be here without the history of the NFL.
So this is actually a question I used to ask on the other show that I had, but I get the keys to the DeLorean, of course, to the listener of the show. They get to go back to any moment in NFL history to be able to be part of it and listen, or to really live it as it was back then. Like, what moment would you want to back in the day?
Wow. What moment? I don't... A lot of the moments that stick out to me are Cowboys losses. So, like, the Jackie, I think it was Jackie Smith, the tight end, who dropped a touchdown pass against the Steelers, one of the Super Bowls, or like the Ice Bowl. before like the NFL championship with Green Bay and Dallas, like those moments, like there were negative moments for the Cowboys, but they were just such big parts of NFL history, especially the ice play. I think that was a Bart Starr sneak or like a short yardage touchdown to put that game away for Green Bay. But like those classic moments and being able to go see that, I think one of them.
There any kind of I don't know, growing up, like you're talking to your dad and stuff or whatever, like reliving real old school. What you said, he was a Jets fan or a Giants fan?
My stepdad was a Jets fan. My uncle was a Giants fan. And my real father, my biological father, was a Eagles fan. So a little bit of everything.
Any cool stories that any of them gave you, just like at being a moment? I was there when that happened. You know, every old dude hangs on to one moment.
Not that I can. But see, my stepdad is the one that really sticks out because he was like enamored, and he passed. He was a little bit older, but he like was enamored with Joe Namath. Wanted to be like Joe Namath growing up. He liked Joe Namath and the Fonz. Like that those were my stepdad's idols. Joe Namath and Fozzie. So, but yeah, like just the guarantee. That was something my stepdad would always bring up. But he grew up in, like, he's a big Yankees fan. So I actually have a Thurman Munson home run ball that he gave me. So it would those are like the more of the moments, sports moments, where like, more Yankee stuff. And I'm not a big baseball fan, but it's just cool to have that ball because his father worked in Yankee Stadium. That's how we got it.
Oh wow, okay, so yeah, even different. I'm thinking of like he's in the outfield catching the home run ball or something. But no, he's got and then again, every time you look at that ball, then you got that memory of him and everything. So that's neat.
Yeah, and my dad is an Eagles season ticket holder, or was back then. So I'm sure he has memories of the vet. I've been to the vet a few times before they knocked it down.
Yeah, it's kind of like me with the Silver Dome for Detroit. That is before they ended up knocking it down, and it's Ford's Field ever since 2002. That's something. When you say what I could do, I would wish, like, bucket list in my adult life, if I ever had the money or hit the lottery or was comfortable enough in my later years, I would love to like get a trailer or something and just drive to every stadium and watch games. But if I could go back into time and go to old stadiums, that would be like if I can go back in a DeLorean, as you say, go back to these old stadiums and live. Like I've been to old Meadowlands, the Vet, and the old Texas Stadium. But like I wish I could go back to like the OG Lambeau Field. Like Lambeau is still there, but they made upgrades. Soldier Field's still there, but they made upgrades. Like I wish I could go to the old places, or like the LA Coliseum in the black hole, like the original black hole. Yeah, I'm with you. That's some stuff I think about that, and as well as listening to the old, I don't know, like when the league first was born in 25, when Red Grange comes onto the map and like totally changes the way that the NFL went and the trajectory, or just Bronco Nagurski back. And like that's the era, like the 20s through 40s, that I really am intrigued with, just because of they were playing for nothing. I mean, they really were. It was just different than it is today. I mean, fantasy football would have been a little bit different story too. We gotta let the listeners know. We gotta remind them, if they want to either get in touch with you somehow, connect with you, or find your work, let's go ahead and let you do that.
You can follow me on Twitter at The Real NFL Guru, and of course, the website, fffaceoff.com, or on social media at the FF Faceoff is where you can follow me and my work. I also do some content over at RotoWire, even though mostly on the back end. I also create some content for them. Like I do shows a lot with Jim Coventry on the RotoWire Sirius XM show and the YouTube channel. I actually just did a spot this morning with Jim there, but Jim was somebody who, when the Faceoff was going through some transitions, Jim was like my co-host for almost over a full season. He really picked up the slack, because who knows if I wasn't ready to be a solo guy yet, and Jim's, me and him had a good relationship, and he's somebody in this industry people should be following. He's outstanding and really a good mentor, I would call him.
Yeah, I can't remember what number episode, but I had Jim on this show back in...
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
okay.
7 or 8. I don't know. I'm actually up to... I think you're number 22 by now, so I have to remember what it was. But yeah, Jim's a cool dude.
Oh, yeah. He's an amazing person.
We're going to hop on the DeLorean again. This is a different kind of story, so you get to go in the future and maybe either predict what the fantasy football landscape looks like 5 to 10 years, whatever it is, or something that you think would be kind of cool to see within the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow. Where is fantasy football going to go? That's a hell of a question because we are seeing the growth and popularity of sports betting, but that's really its own entity. We have DFS. The new craze is like the best ball and these like Best Ball Mania 4, which is like, $3 million to first. And this thing keeps getting bigger. I think we're going to start seeing the popularity of these large field tournaments grow. That's kind of where I see this industry going. We're going to see more of these tournaments and people trying to crack these millions of dollars. Because the difference, and I like high state, I like the FFPC and playing in their tournaments. That kind of rejuvenate. When you're playing fantasy, as long as I have, it kind of got stale. And 3 years ago, I started my first FFPC. And that's like, okay, like you're putting a little bit more money on the table, but like at the end of the day, you can really go win, grow your bankroll. So and when you're doing like an FFPC football players championship draft, it just feels different. And that kind of sparked my love for fantasy again. It wasn't just like a job. Now I love it again. But what this underdog does, it gives people the opportunity to throw in $25 and have a chance. So it's almost like a scratch off. So I think we start seeing more affordable large field tournaments. And the more affordable it is, the more people that are going to play. And we are seeing that when these Best Ball Manias are filling up immensely. So I can see more of these larger field tournaments becoming a thing.
Yeah, I could see that as well. And I'm curious, what will end up being the next style? Like Best Ball, it's already here, but like you said, maybe advanced. And I'm always curious about like what's around the corner and that kind of thing. We're gonna leave you with this question because you already answered a lot of the recommendations for people trying to get in the industry. But as far as, let's just say this upcoming season, you've been successful. You don't have to pat your own shoulder. I'll do that for you. As far as like rankings and such, if someone were to want to maybe, create their own rankings seasonally and or weekly, like what kind of just advice do you give them for like where to start?
Temper expectations. Being in the Fantasy Pros expert consensus is humbling because, it is the only true way outside of your bankroll being in the red or the green. It's really the only true way to measure your success as a fantasy guy because you are getting graded on your accuracy by an algorithm at Fantasy Pros. And I think football diehards does it as well, but like Fantasy Pros is like the cream of the crop of it. And it's public and everybody can see how you do. And it's humbling because yes, I've had success, but I've also had really bad weeks, a couple of bad years. So when you're starting, like I would say go in there humbled. Otherwise it's going to humble you because I've been humbled by that. It's not fun. Because you can't wait till the next week kicks off so you can forget that you ranked 140 out of 200. That don't feel good. So like, I remember those weeks more than my top 10 weeks. I remember the bad weeks. I'm the type of person that dwells on the bad to try to make that never happen again.
There you go. You do you. And be willing to take a shot. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Fantasy Football Origin Stories here on the Sports History Network, and were able to come away with some nuggets of info or reminisce about some players that we talked about or just straight up had a good time. With that, I'll catch you next week on the podcast. And to learn more about our other shows on the network, you can head over to sportshistorynetwork.com. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fantasy Football Origin Stories. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, Please make sure to mash that little subscribe or follow button on your podcast player of choice, then head over to the website for the show notes and more fantasy football origin stories. That's at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Great Scott.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
The Pigskin Tales podcast is all about the lesser-known pro football players. Yes, there are stories about the ones we know, like Brad Tarkenton and Harold Red Grange. But have you ever heard of Ernie Nevers? How about Dave Osborne or even Grady Alderman? These men created their own path to the NFL. How did they do it? Listen to the Pigskin Tales podcast, now streaming on your favorite music platform. Go to pigskintales.com.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.